Good day, everyone. In our previous class, we discussed on relational algebra in database management system where we talked about the few key difference operations in relational algebra, where we talked about selection operations. We also talk about projection operations. We look at Cartesian product. We look at the union of tuples in relational algebra. We also look at intersections as well as the said difference in relational algebra in database management system. You are welcome to today's sessions. I remain Mr. Bamanga Mahmoud Ahmad, your guide this moment. Today in this session, we are going to look at ERM, that's Entity Relationship Model in database management system. And entity relationship model is a graphical representation between our entities so that it can be able to show the entity types and the relationships among these entities, where each order in where each and every entity in the entity relationship model in the database can be able to be represented. In this session today, we are going to talk about entity relationship model in database management system, where our entity relationship model is a graphical representation of or between entities showing the relation types and the types of each entity to what? To each other entity in a different table. Entity relationship model also provides a relationship between our entities, our attributes, and then the relationship amongst these entities. Where we say the entity types or the entity itself, the entity, we talk about attributes and we talk about relationship or association between these entities. So, in entity relationship model, our entities, these entities now that we are talking about, is represented by what? By a rectangle like this. By a what? By a rectangle. Where the what? The attributes are represented by what? By ovals. Are we together? And then this relationship is what? Represented with a diamond shape called decisions. If you're good in programming, this is what is represented as our relationship or what? Or association. So the model here or the entity relationship model, the model that is called in the entity relationship, it what define the structure of the database and how the entities in this database interact with what? With each other. And these entities are what we call what? Tables in what database management system. So why do we prefer to be using entity relationship model? We prefer to be using entity relationship model because it helps us to conceptualize the database, that we have the database in mind. So entity relationship model allows us to conceptualize this idea that we have in mind, so that it can let us to know which field is to be what embedded for a particular entity and which one is not going to be embedded for a particular entity. That is one reason. The second reason is what? It gives us a better understanding of the what data to be stored in the database. All this thing we have been doing in the what? The database architecture, the data model, and what have you. We are what? We are going to what? Identify the types of data that we are going to store in this database using entity relationship models. The third one is what? It helps us to reduce the complexity and also help us to what? To the helps database designer to simplify his what? His idea. It also allows him what? To what? Implement the idea he have in mind quickly in what? Using entity relationship model. So the fourth reason why we prefer using entity relationship model is because it allows users to get a preview of the what? The logical structure. While we are discussing about the logical structure in what? Data modeling. If you remember, we talked about physical model, physical model, logical model, and then conceptual data model. So in the logical data model, we talked about those people, the stakeholders, and then the database administrator or the database developer. Those are the what? People involved in what? Database modeling. So these people now, they get idea or less issue or issues in what? In going about implementing their database if they are using this entity relationship model. So these are the what? Four reasons why we prefer using our entity relationship models. And our entities, our ERM or entity, we might have something like this ERM, that's entity relationship model. It's been categorized. We said we have what? If you've seen this, we have entity. So we have attribute, attribute, and then we have relation, right? This is what we have written in the first instant relationship, which is the association, right? Good. So in entity, we have what we call entity sets. Sorry, we have what we call entity types and then entity set. This is what we are having in what? In under entity. And what is this entity? Entity is a real world object having some characteristics. Those characteristics are the attributes. And it can also be what? These entities can also be a living thing or non-living thing. I think we have mentioned this in one of our classes when we are dealing with Java programming or computer programming one, when we said our entities can be a tangible and intangible entity. It's just the same thing like this one. The living thing and non-living thing components can be what? Our entities. So we look at the tangible entities here, like student is tangible entity, bank account is an intangible entity or non-tangible entity or non-living thing, right? So when we talk about a car, we know it's a what? Tangible entities. But when we talk about ATM pin, these are what? Intangible or non-tangible, intangible entities, right? So this is the same thing here. So we have what we call entity types. So these entity types represent the entity set with a what? With a name. We have entity type which represent our entity set with a what? With a name. So in this entity type, we have what we call strong entity type, and the weak entity type, right? So strong entity type, when we talk about the strong entity type, these are the what? These are the entity types that are having a primary key. Let's look at this. If we have student ID, we have student name, we have student age, and what have you. This is a table, right? We have 0001 as our student ID. We have, let's assume, Bamanga as a student. We have age 20. So we have 002 as our staff ID. We have Mahmoud as name. we have age as 18. So now, this what? This is the entity types, right? These are what? Entity type that that is being represented by these names. Are we together? These are records. These are records. So if we are talking about strong entity, we are talking about entities that are what? That are having a primary key like this, which are what? Which are, can be easily identified, or matrix number or something. So this is what? This very table we can call it strong entity type, right? So now, if we have another table called just serial and student name, student age, student course of study, and what have you. So this very table is going to be regarded as weak entity type because it does not contain a primary key. It does not contain a primary key. That is why we are going to regard this as a weak entity, the other one as what? As a strong entity, because it does not contain what? Primary key. So all this one what? The whole of this record are entity. The whole of this record are entity, and so on and so forth. So, and the whole of this now is called entity set. Entity set. Are we together? So this is how we regard our what? Our entity. So the second one is a weak entity because it doesn't contain what? Primary key. So I believe we don't have any issue regarding this entity. So we are going to look at the attributes. We are going to look at the attributes here. So attributes are the characteristics of the entity. Let's assume we have this attribute, we have this entity called student. Right? Student is an entity and it's being represented by what? By a rectangle like this. So we have characteristics or features of these students. The features of this student or the characteristics is regarded to as attribute. That's in essence, you have entity like this. Then you have attribute, and what have you, attribute and what have you. So this is what they mean here. So it's the same thing that we are trying to explain here now. You have your student. What are the attributes relating to this student? We might have a what? Matrix number, right? Matrix number represented by overs. We also have a phone number. It's represented by overs, right? We also have age represented by overs, right? So we also have department represented by this. We have name like this, right? So we have DOB. So and so on and so forth. So we have in this attribute, we have what we call simple attribute, we have what we call composite attribute, we also have keys. We also have keys under these attributes. So when we talk about a simple attribute, these simple attributes are attributes that cannot be further be divided into what? Into sub attributes. And the composite attribute are attributes that you can further be divided them or divide them into what? Into some attributes. You get this? The simple attribute and the composite attribute. The simple attributes are those attributes that you cannot further be divided, or they cannot be further be divided into some attributes. For instance, age. You cannot further divide age. But if we talk about DOB, that's date of birth, right? You can what? Further be divide this date of birth into what? Day, you have month, you have year. So, are we together? This name, you can further divide this name into what? First name, surname, then other name or middle name, right? So, matric number, you cannot further divide matric number. So, in this case, DOB, name are what? Are composite attribute. While the other ones here are what? Simple attributes. Are we together? So when we talk about key in entity relationship model, we are talking about what? The attribute. We are talking about those attributes that you can use in database management system to easily identify a record within your database. That's what your key is. So this key now, it's being further categorized into almost 4 or 5, depends on the what, the book you're studying, or depends on the scholar that is what, putting you through. So in this class now, we have further classified your keys into what? Into 4 basic keys that we are having here. One, we have what we call primary key. The primary key is a single attribute that you can use uniquely to what? To verify or to confirm or to find record within your databases. So it's the most famous attribute you have in database management system. You remember, we said a strong entity are those entities with what? With a uniquely identifier or that contain a primary key. So, example, your MAT number, are we together? And your staff number and what have you. These are what? The attribute that you can use in your database management system to uniquely identify your record. Are we together? So when we talk about composite attribute, we talk about these are the keys that consist of two or more attributes to uniquely identify an entity within what? Within an entity. You identify your entity within an entity. Example, employee ID or department ID. I have my in what? You can have your primary key defined in the system. You can also have employee ID, which is what? Is the what? Composite attribute. So this composite attribute or department ID, once you go on department IDO, you'll be able to what? Sort your department and then see the list of staff under that very department. Are we together? So you what? You use your composite key. So we also have what we call as candidate key. Candidate key is also a key that you can use to identify or track a record. Example, if we said something like order ID. You know, order ID is not a primary key, but you can use it to track your order, maybe in form of if you're doing a what? Online order or online tracking system. So you can use your order to what? Or order number in order to track your what? Your purchase online. So we have foreign key. In these keys, you know, we must in one way or the other work with a primary key which is denoted as PK, and then we have your foreign key which is denoted as F key. Are we together? We have PK and we have FK. So these two, we must work with them in database management system. This primary key is what? Used to identify a record within a table. This also use the same thing, but this references a record in another table. Let's assume we have a table called student and a courses. student TBL with student table, and we have course TBL, course table, right? Here we have student ID, which is the primary key, right? Here we have course ID, which is also a primary key. If we are relating this and this, we might have course ID here as foreign key. Then we have student surname or student name, student age, student department, and what have you. Here we have course code, we have course title, and what have you. So you see now, this is the primary key of this course table, but here it's being used to reference your course table in student table here. So that's the what? The typical scenario of your foreign key and then primary key. Are we together? So when we talk about relationship or when we talk about association in database management system, this is very, very fundamental. You cannot design your database without relation. If you can design your database without relation, your database is useless, my friend. So your relationship represents an association or connection between two or more entities. That's what the relationship or association does. It represents the associations between two entities or a connection between two entities. So it also describes how these entities are related or interact with each other in the database system. Are we together? So we have what we call types of relationship in database management system, which is regarded as cardinality ratio. Cardinality ratio. So this is the type of what? Types of relationship in database management system, right? So types of relationship in database management system is regarded to as cardinality ratio. So the cardinality ratio, what it does here, it defines the number of instances of one entity that can be associated with the what? The instances of another entity in another table through the use of what? The keys that we have just mentioned, through the use of primary key and then the foreign key. That's what it does. So it also describes the participation or occurrence of an entity in what? In a given relationship. So we have what we call one-to-one, which is this ratio, one-to-one relationship. We have one-to-many relationship. It's denoted as 1 to n, right? So we also have many to many relationship. Are we together? So these are what? We have one to one, one to many to one, and many to many. We also have many to one, please. Many to one. Many to one is denoted like one like this. So we are going to look each at this cardinality ratio. When we talk about one-to-one relationship, in this one-to-one relationship, each instance of one entity set is associated with exactly one instance of that of the other entity set, or vice versa. Example: a person has exactly one passport. I cannot have more than one international passport, right? I cannot have more than one national identity number. So, and one national identity number to one citizen, one international passport to one citizen, one passport to one international citizen, one national ID card, national identity number to one citizen. That's what is regarded to as one-to-one relationship. When we talk about one-to-many relationship, this is what mean that each instance of one entity set can be associated to what? With many instances of another entity in another relationship. Example, one customer can place many order. I can buy product on Alibaba Express. I can what? Make a purchase, many purchase or multiple purchase on Jumia or on any other online platform. I can do that, right? But that particular product that I am purchasing cannot be purchased by what? By many users. Are we together? So in this case, many like now, many, one like this as I am, I can place many order online. As simple as this. That's one to many relationship. If we are talking about many to one relationship, it means that multiple instances of one entity set can be associated with what is with a single instances of what? Of other entity set. Example, many students can register a single course. We have a single course here called CSC 313, Database Management System, right? So in this introduction to database management system is a single course, but how many of you are taking the course? You are many, right? So in these instances, we can say it like many to one relationship. Are we together? So we also have what we call many to many relationship, meaning that multiple instances of what entity set can be associated with many instances of another entity set in another table. Example, many students can be enrolled in multiple courses, right? So many students can be enrolled in multiple courses. So we have many courses in the department. We have a database management system, we have introduction to computer programming, we have introduction to computer graphics, we have complexity analysis, we have data structure and what have you. All these courses can be registered by many students. Are we together? Are we getting these instances so lovely? So that's what the explanation of this cardinality ratio entails in this class today. So this is what we have in this cardinality, in these entity relationship models. So if you do enjoy this class, please let us know in the comment section, please. And if you have any hitches or any difficulties that you are finding it in this very class, you should also let us know in our comment section so that we can make the class so lovely and interactive. Thank you for being with me in this class. See you next.